Sorry. Tonight we're going to discuss some of the approaches that we find maybe very much in our time about how the poskim address questions of halacha when it comes to COVID, but not necessarily only about COVID. It happens to be many of the questions that come up are really all year, every year sort of questions, but just come up, and the question is, how much do we deviate? How much is allowed to slide? How much do we change from the standard halacha when we're a little bit under pressure? That's the real question we're going to try to address. I'm going to show different approaches of the different poskim, and I really want to bring out some like principles of halacha that we're going to think about. Okay? So first, I want to ask, how far do you think we should take a shad hadachak? If someone's under pressure, it's a really difficult situation. Imagine, let's say the standard question I'm sure everybody's heard about. Before Pesach, there were many people, unfortunately, who were isolated for Pesach. They couldn't go home because there was an older person. They couldn't go anywhere. They had to stay in isolation. So for Pesach, they were all by themselves for safety. Question is, is it allowed, or was it allowed to do a video, a phone, Seder with that person, including them? Question really somewhat pivoted on how usher is it, and what do we let slide when we're coming to Shad HaTzak? So what do we think on that question? What would you say if someone asked you? We're going to have Rosh Hashanah soon. Someone who can't leave their house, are we allowed to do the shofar via Zoom?
I don't think so.
So why not?
Because if we say we're not allowed to respond, let's say Amen for a Kaddish or something like that. That's where I'm going at. Like, you cannot do minyan it's not like being in the place. I don't know.
Okay. So it doesn't get us there. Fine. What if he says, I just want to listen to the piyutim of Yom Kippur, because I really like to, I enjoy listening to the piyutim. Not all starting to do like Netana Tokef, okay? I think some of this is starting to have that. But okay, you want to hear Oked V'Hanei Akkad. You want to hear Achol Ketana. Someone's going to go Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur and not hear them? What if they say, I really just want to listen on the phone? What do you say about that? Not to be yotzei, but just because it makes me feel good to be involved with the minyan.
If you're not yotzei, why would you be doing it? That's the thing. Like,
let's say he feels good. He wants to hear the piyut, okay, V'Hanei Akkad.
We don't do things to feel good. That's it.
Right?
It's a sin.
Should we say somewhat, basically the question would somewhat boil down to a little bit. Could you say, B'shad hadachak, under pressure, we could rely on an individual opinion. Kedai hu, whatever we'll say here, Rishon Mazalman or Bach, whatever. Kedai hu, somebody, l'smoch Allah b'shad hadachak. We can rely on the individual opinion when it's a pressure situation. Grandpa, Rabbi Hannon, what do you say? Oh, okay. Well, anybody want to add opinions, you could. Feel free. So that's the question I want to discuss. How far do we let things go when it's a shad l'chak? Which things we're allowed to push, which ones not?
Okay. So the ones who pushed on the Zoom for Seder, they were going to put the Zoom on before Yom Tov started. But actually on Rosh Hashanah or on Yom Kippur, it's much, much more strict, and you can't just do things on Zoom.
What I meant is, let's say you set it up from before, but yes, there's a big difference between setting it up on and setting it up before. Very good point. So let's say you set it up before Rosh Hashanah, or before Yom Kippur. Could that work? Because, okay, I'll set up that question, and then I want to sort of dive into the main topic that we're going to sort of think about. So let's say we're going to discuss, I'm going to show my PowerPoint now, share my screen. 3 approaches from the poskim. Okay? One of them is, I'm going to present. The first one is someone that we might have heard of. If not, I want to introduce him tonight, one of 3 people. We're going to discuss halachas from Rabbi Zilberstein, from Rabbi Usher White, and from Rabbi Herschel Shafter. Okay, so we're going to discuss all of them. I'm going to give a little background on them and a little bit of the story, and then the fascinating questions that came up in hundreds of questions that happened over the last few months and their general approach and style. So Rabbi Zilberstein has some popular books that people may have heard of. Halakhic questions on the Parsha Harevna, or Alina the Shabech, Hashukei Chemed, fun questions on Gemara, and many other things. And he is very much a Haredi from Bnei Brak, although he has some other background in his life, but his style is more or less similar to those Rabbanim from Bnei Brak. He comes from Poland, 1930s. His parents got out before the Holocaust. He lived when he was a little kid. He lived in Yerushalayim. He learned in Eitz Chaim Yeshiva. That's where Shlomo Zalman Auerbach learned. Many Gedolim learned over there by Aryeh Levine, who was the mashgiach there. We'll mention his name in a moment. Aryeh Levine is such a tremendous tzaddik. He was called the tzaddik of our time. The book about him is written, a tzaddik in our times. He had so many wonderful stories. Talking about Magefa, plagues. So about Aryeh Levine, it said, it's in his book, it's in the book, part of it's a biography. He used to visit lepers, people who had leprosy, and they were in confinement, they were in isolation, and they had nobody, no rabbi, nobody coming to visit them for long periods of time. And he was the rabbi that would come to visit them on Shabbat every single week and try to do Kriya Torah for them, try to do mitzvah for them, try to encourage them. And there are wonderful like miracle stories that it's written about him. One time that he was, and there was a lockdown, a shutdown from the British government before the War of Independence, before 1948, where they said no Jews are allowed walking around at night. Not walking around in the streets at all. And he felt bad for all the lepers, and they also used to go visit the Jews that were in jail every single week. And one time when he was in the street, he was going to be caught by a British soldier who was going to throw him in jail because he wasn't allowed to be outside under the British mandate before the War of Independence in 48. So what happened was, apparently the way the story goes is, he took a paper out of his pocket. It had nothing on it, but he had, before he went, he had a dream. They should take a certain paper in his pocket. He took the paper with his pocket and he gave it to the British soldier. And the British soldier said, "Oh, I see you're very, I see you have a pass from someone very, very important. I'm going to let you go through this time." So he takes it and he looks at the paper. He was wondering to see what happened. The paper was empty. He must be that, some nace happened. And he gets to the leper colony and he does something and he makes a minyan for them and he gives them some words of encouragement and a similar story on his way back. But there's numerous stories about Rav Aryeh Levine, such a tremendous tzaddik in his time, because he would go out of his way for people that had very little and had no one else to take care of them. Though the leprosy was not as contagious and as dangerous as corona, so it's not a halakhic story, but it's a meaningful story. So back to the Rav Zilberstein, I want to show just now a little bit back to when I showed this Masorah tree the other day. Rav Aryeh Levine was a student in Volozhin. He learned in Volozhin, Rav Aryeh Levine, and the same tzaddik in Yerushalayim, Rav Aryeh Levine, and Rav Chaim Volozhin, the Talmud of the Gra, who goes back generations to the Ramah, to Rashi. Anyway, so he was learning in Volozhin in the middle of 1800s. And one of their things in Yiddish they had was Estentag. Estentag is, they used to eat meals by people who would host them. They'd go for meals to people who, eat around at different people's tables. So they'd lunch every Wednesday at this person's house, and at Thursday, every night he would eat at this person's house, and so on and so forth. However, it happens that he felt that a certain, he knew that this person that he used to eat dinner with very often, he used to be nice, that he would invite him for dinner. He used to try to convince him. He said, "You're such a brilliant scholar. You should go to college. You shouldn't be learning secular studies. You become a lawyer, a mathematician, a scientist, a doctor." what are you doing, an engineer? Why are you going to learn all your life? And he tried encouraging him. So Rav Aryeh Levine didn't take to that, and he wasn't interested, and he felt bothered every time he went to this person's house. So he decided to stop going. So he used to fast. I think the book says it's twice a week for a long time, and eventually he decided to leave Volozhin basically because of this issue, and he never said to the Rosh Yeshiva why. And the Rosh Yeshiva at the time was Rabbi Zalman Meltzer. Just to say, years and years later, Rabbi Zalman Meltzer moved to Yerushalayim, and very soon after, he came in the middle of the night and knocked on Rabbi Levine's door, and he said, I finally have heard the story about why you left Volozhin, because you didn't want to say the Lashon Hara about the people that hosted you, and you didn't feel comfortable. So I just wanted to ask Mechila. They said, what do you mean ask Mechila? You were the Rosh Yeshiva. He said, I should have asked you about how everything was going. I should have been more on top of it. Anyway, back to Rav Aryeh Levine. So Rav Aryeh Levine, a very, very holy person. He had a daughter, a very special woman that became the Rebbetzin of Rav Elyashiv. That was Rav Aryeh Levine. Rav Aryeh Levine also ran the yeshiva Kol Torah. And we'll get back to Rav Elyashiv in a moment. Rav Elyashiv, though, was the Gedol Hador for many years in Israel, ran away from fame, but with, let's say, Chacham Ovadia for Sardim, he was a contemporary, and he discussed many questions together. They agreed on many things. They sat on the Beis with Herzog together on many occasions. That's Rav Elyashiv. So anyway, Rav Elyashiv's wife was this daughter of Rav Aryeh Levine. But anyway, Rav Aryeh Levine ran a yeshiva, and in this yeshiva, Kol Torah, they had Rav Zilberstein. We'll get back to Rav Zilberstein because Rav Zilberstein he's married into the Elyashiv family. His wife is Rav Elyashiv's daughter. So basically, full circle, he's a student of Rav Aryeh Levine, but he's also married into the family. Anyway, just while we're here, very famous, and he's going to be relevant to the questions and answers that Rav Zilberstein very often gives. A brother-in-law of Rav Zilberstein is Rav Chaim Kanievsky. Rav Chaim Kanievsky is alive and well, he should continue to live. And they'll say the Sima Shas, he came on for a few minutes, and they had a tremendous siyum. Every single year, he learns all of Talmud Bavli, Yerushalmi, Rambam, Zohar, Tosefta, Shulchan Aruch, and I think more. But he does that in a few hours every single day. He calls them the Phobos, he does. So for most people, doing 8 daf a day and Yerushalmi 5 daf is a little bit over their heads, but that's Rav Chaim Kanievsky's standard learning. And he's into, I think, his 90s. He is also a son-in-law of Rav Elyashiv and a brother-in-law of Rav Zilberstein. He's the son of the Stipler, and the Stipler, one of the Goanim, also in Bnei Brak, and he learned from the Alter Nevardik and came back also again from Volozhin. Okay. Also, Rav Chaim Kanievsky is his wife is from Rav Elyashiv, but his father is the Stipler. His mother was the sister of the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish had no children, sadly enough, but the Chazon Ish's sister was Chaim Kanievsky. Nissen Karelitz is also from another sister of the Chazon Ish and a nephew of the Chazon Ish. Okay? Nissen Karelitz was nifter only months ago. Okay? So back to Rav Zilberstein. So Rav Zilberstein's style, if anybody's ever read any of his things or heard of him, is very, very fun. He doesn't just get questions and answer like bottom line. Is anybody right? Like Rav Chaim Kanievsky, it's one word answer. Yes, no, maybe. End of story. Rav Zilberstein always has a fun way of saying things. There's a cute raya. His stuff is very sweet to read. It's not at all as rigorous or intense like Rav Vadia Chuvas or Rav Moshe Chuvas. You have to like break your head and like work on them. They're very much like a walk in the park, a piece of cake. So I'll show you some of them. But they're always infused with questions. They're always infused with things he heard from Rav Elyashiv and Rav Chaim Kanievsky. And they always have fun stories in them, things that you'd never ever think would happen. Okay? So back to Rav Zilberstein. Okay? He married Rav Elyashiv's daughter. He lived in Switzerland. That's why he has good publicity, very good. And he went to Israel. He lives now near Bnei Brak. Very good. And so Chashukei Chemed is one of his books, and he put out stuff on Corona, 3 pamphlets, about 100 pages, more than 100 pages collectively, like 100, I don't know, 100 or 200 pages collectively. And he discusses at length, for example, like what segulas, what good things are there to do to avoid corona. And he's very into segulas, and he wants to help people find out what's a good segula. So one day he asked Rabbi Ike Sultan, what's a segula to avoid corona? They said, oh, you should learn Ezu Neshech. It's one of the sections in Gemara. So he asked him, why Ezu Neshech? Oh, because it's a hard one, and it's difficult like Sarai. Okay, Rabbi Ike Sultan, but he trusts everything Rabbi Ike Sultan said. Rabbi Ike Sultan is one of the Gedolim, but that's something that you won't find in other tshuvos. That's just not something that they deal with. And then a different day he says, I asked him what he should learn, and he said, oh, we should learn brachos. He said, wait a minute, but you told me last week people should start learning Ezu Neshech. So he said, oh, last week it was really bad. There are a lot of people catching corona. This week it got a little better. That's why I told you that you should learn brachos. Because to make 100 brachos a day, it saves you from a plague like Davening instituted. Anyway, it's like part of his style is to involve lots of stories, lots of quotes from lots of people. Anyway, he says a story though. In when he's talking about the segulas, he says, he said, learn. Now, I'm not at all talking about, if anybody ever heard anything about Rabbi Ike in the last few months, I'm just going to say it just so you've heard of it, but it's unfortunately negative publicity because he didn't get the right information. It's not his fault to some degree, but what happened is he told the yeshivas in the Bnei Brak to continue to learn even after the Israeli government said it wasn't safe, because he said the most important thing for us to do is to learn Torah. And the problem was he didn't really have that much contact with doctors, and so eventually his brother-in-law Rav Zilberstein, one of the people, it said in the articles, anybody read them, Rav Zilberstein was one of the people, and Rav Zilberstein gets shilas from, he's one of the rabbeim on the Laniado Hospital in Bnei Brak. He answers medical shilas. He has a few svarim specifically about medicine. He's not a doctor, he never went to college, but he knows a lot about medicine. So Rav Zilberstein spoke to Chaim Kanievsky, and he was involved in closing the yeshivas. But Chaim Kanievsky is just not, medicine is not his field, and he was misinformed about what the Messias was. Anyway, he says a story that a doctor went to go visit a house call to the mother-in-law of the Rosh Yeshiva Panovich. Panovich is the main yeshiva in Bnei Brak. The Rosh Yeshiva there is Rabbi Edelstein. Rabbi Edelstein, a big tzaddik, and he was staying with his wife and his kids. I don't know, he's not young, by his in-laws to take care of his in-laws that were very old. So they were taking care of them, and the doctor was afraid that the mother-in-law was very sick. So the doctor came and made a house call to see if they could do anything for this mother-in-law. And lo and behold, what he noticed, this rabbi, the Rosh Yeshiva, Panovich, was giving shir on the phone to people, and he didn't have any tables because the mother-in-law was on a ventilator, and there was medicine. Everything was scattered all over the house and on the tables. It was a small house, and he said there was no room on the table to put down a sefer. So he took out a few folding chairs, and he made a base medrash with folding chairs. They put all the svarim on the chairs, and he was standing around on the phone giving a shir. So the doctor was impressed to see in Panovich in Bnei Brak, corona didn't stop the learning Torah. Anyway, Rav Zilberstein quotes on his tshuvas to encourage everybody to try to keep learning with the best Torah ability. Now getting to some shilas. Here's the fun shilah. Tell me what you think. A boy that's supposed to get married 2 days before his wedding caught corona, tested positive. And they already booked the hall, and they want to know, are they allowed to do the wedding? And really, the kala, the fiance, is not really supposed to be in contact with him. So maybe they can't even do a yichud room. Forget they can't do a yichud room. They can't have the canopy if the groom has corona. So Rav Zilberstein got this question 2 days before the guy's wedding. The guy is testing positive for corona. Should they do the wedding? Should they push it off? Should they do the wedding? And basically what Rav Zilberstein suggests, maybe they should do it with a shliach, an agent. Just do a ceremony, get 10 people, family members, call it a wedding, and they'll be in isolation. And then they'll be, the husband, the fiance, and the groom, they'll be together a little later. I would never have thought this question ever happening, but Rav Zilberstein addressed it. What do you say? I want to hear, what do you think? Salo, you have a sheet. You have an idea.
Definitely not go there, because if it's a situation of sakana, it's better not to spread it out. Now I don't know what other options there is.
Okay, so you're on the ball. Okay, Rav Zilberstein is very into, even though he's from Bnei Brak, and not everybody in Bnei Brak held this, very into you have to follow all the orders of the doctors. So that's correct. He said they cannot have the wedding together because of sakana. They're not allowed. But he said maybe they could do a wedding via Zoom, a wedding where the husband and the wife are not even in the same room. They could do it. And he says it's a Mishnah. We're allowed to do weddings via, who's going to give the ring? He'll ask his best friend, can you give the ring to my fiancé? Hare mekudeshet, not li, kudeshet l'chaveri, to my friend. So he says, yes, it works. But he says, I don't recommend it. He says, he quotes, he's very good at quoting a lot of people. He quotes Chaim Pelagi, Sardi. He says that they made a takana in Yerushalayim 200 years ago that people shouldn't get married through agents for a good reason. What happened was in the days of the Or Zarua, this is more than 500 years ago. This is in Germany, 1300s. A guy got married through a letter. He sent a letter to a family. I want to set up a shidduch. And they set up a shidduch. And the guy is a very smart person, and he got all the good recommendations. Beautiful. And he said, Harem, and he sent a ring in the mail. Beautiful. And you could do that. They got married in the mail. And then the cowl of the fiancé comes to meet the guy, and he has a patch over his eye. And she says, no, what are you, you're dressing up for Purim? He says, I'm blind. I have a patch over both my eyes. I can't see. So he said, why didn't you tell me that in the letter? He said, because I thought you wouldn't marry me. So they sent to the Or Zarua. The wife wants out. Husband says, I'm not giving a get. This is one of those very sad situations. The Or Zarua did say the marriage is null and void. But in any event, that's why the Chaim Pelagi was not into marriages through agencies, because it doesn't lead to good results. Anyway, that's where Rizal Razim came out. He doesn't recommend it. But he has these funny sort of questions I wouldn't have guessed have even come up. Here, I'm going to share my screen on some of the other questions, and I'm going to move on to the second of the three personalities we're going to discuss. That was a Zoom marriage. Hold on, it went too fast. Yeah, Zoom Seder. So this was Rabbi Eliyahu Abigail. There was a Sephardi rabbi and a few others that had signed off on a Zoom Seder and leaving the computer on from before. And 8 of them retracted later after it became very controversial. 4 of them held their opinion. In a nutshell, if you look through, let's say, Rav Avadia's Shita, or Rosh Zalman's especially, on talking into a microphone on Shabbat, it's not very obvious that there's so many problems with it. The main thing comes down to is Hashmat Kol, which in a very technical sense, for Ashkenazim is more of an issue, and for Sephardim, simply it's probably not an issue. And even Hashmat Kol, Rosh Zalman discusses. He's not actually lenient in speaking to a microphone on Shabbat, but if anybody's ever seen the quote-unquote kosher microphones for shuls, which not everybody holds that are even kosher, but some shuls that have them are relying on leniencies. So it's not at all strange in a halakhic sense, in a very technical, dry sense, to say, could you allow this? If you follow all the cut and dry questions from some poskim, there would be room to discuss it. That doesn't preclude, though, the conclusion of most poskim was no way. Why no way? So let's just see here, Rav Zilberstein's way. Rav Zilberstein says, first he talked about recording. He said the father had corona, and he's in the hospital, and his children are at home. And he wanted to know if he didn't talk about Zoom in the first tshuva just because they're in Bnei Brak. So what they talked about could he do a recording on a cassette in the hospital of the Seder, and then his children will play it when they're at home during the Seder, and he'll be yotzei the mitzvah of he got to the bincha. So first he discusses for a few paragraphs, are you yotzei the mitzvah on recording? What do you think about that? I want to hear. Levi's, any ideas? If I were to record into an audio cassette something and someone listens to it later, do I get the mitzvah of teaching Torah? Is that the mitzvah of Higat L'Bincha of teaching the Seder? What do we think?
I think you could have the mitzvah of teaching Torah when it's recorded. Like when you put it up on YU Torah, you get a mitzvah when people are listening. But in terms of fulfilling the mitzvah of shofar, definitely definitely not. And you got Talavincha, that has to be present.
Wow. Okay. Presence is different. I hear.
And is it a problem you're saying on Yantif listening to a pre-recording?
Yeah. So after 3 paragraphs discussing the theoretical fun question about are you to the mitzvah, he thinks that Hagata Lebincha can be done even if not being present. But basically, what's Hagata Lebincha about? It's about Masorah, giving over an idea of our tradition. You can give that over even if you're not there. Now that's a question of when you educate, you have to be in person. How important is presence? But anyway, he thinks you're Yotze that. But he says, but you can't do it on Yontif because you have to judge, is it considered a problem of Hashma Kol? Then in a later volume, that was in the first volume of Corona Shiloh. In his 3rd volume, he says, I asked Rechaim Kanievsky, that's how many of his true. Then asked Rechaim Kanievsky, he said, no way. End of the story. Rechaim Kanievsky didn't give a reason, as he generally doesn't answer any of the questions more than us or Mutter. If anybody's seen like shoot Rechaim Kanievsky, that's it's one word answers. Okay, next personality I want to discuss is Rav Usher White. I'm going to get to Schefter later. Any questions, though, on what I said so far? All right, so Rav Usher White, if anybody's heard of him or not, I'm going to discuss that he is a personality that some people in America have had contact with a little bit more than Rabbi Zilberstein. Rabbi Zilberstein is from Bnei Brak. Yeah, some people have read some of his books because he's very fun, interesting questions and stories. However, very little contact with us because he didn't go to college. He has nothing to do with the modern world. And a different personality is Rav Usher White. Rav Usher White, on the one hand, comes from a Hasidic background, Borough Park, and he didn't learn English as his first language. He learned Yiddish. He didn't learn English, but he picked up English on his own. He didn't go to college. He learned English on his own, but he learned English from a dictionary. If anybody listens to Shirim, he gives Shirim to Americans all the time. It's great. His English is very good, and he lives in Israel, and he's very, very close with many figures that people have heard of. Herschel Schefter, he communicates on many things. His son, Shai Schefter, very often is in contact with Rav Usher White, as well as he's the rabbi of Shari Tzedek. He took over, many years before, but Eliezer Waldenberg, the Tzitz Eliezer, he answers medical trials all the time in Shari Tzedek, and he is a very fun personality. He is also the teacher. He is in contact with one from Moroccan, Rav Avadia Yosef Toledano. Rav Avadia Yosef Toledano is Rav Avadia's grandson, named after his grandfather, Ram Avadia. But he went and learned in the Kollel of Rav Usher White for a number of years. So if anybody's ever seen the tshuvas like a Rav Avadia, they have like 500, one of the biggest tshuvas, Dalit Lamed Dalit, 500, it's only 10 columns or 15 columns, and he has over 500 makoros. And you look at Rav Usher White's tshuvas, they are as sweet as could be because he has very clear, organized thinking. And you look at the Rav Avadia Yosef Toledano, Sephardi Sefer Mishpad Halacha, I forget exactly the name, but Mishpad Halacha, something like that. His Sefer, the first two was about, let's say, websites on Shabbat. Are you allowed to leave a website, business website on Shabbat? And it's at least 50 pages long. So he has the length of Rav Avadia, but the clarity of Rav Usher White. It's incredible to read his stuff. So anybody ever, and you can email him. Like he's not very old, Rav Avadia Yosef Toledano, and I don't know. I know somebody in YU that asks him questions. Possible. Anyway, so Rav Usher White, he gets questions, and I heard him discussing very, very intense medical questions. For example, like triage. Are you allowed to use a ventilator for 2 patients when corona is going up, when there are not enough ventilators? Are you allowed to take someone off a ventilator? Very, very sad and serious question. If someone they know is probably not going to make it. So in medical triage, a very basic rule is you do what's most efficient and what's best. So if someone you know, the chance of making is very, very slim, you could take them off the ventilator and take this new patient who's in his 20s and got corona and he needs a ventilator. Is much better chances than the guy in his 80s. So it's a tremendous tumult in the halachic world. Is that ever allowed? Schefter has written something about it, and in a little bit, he is edging on the side. There is such a possibility, not always, of halachic triage, similar to medical triage. Or Usher White, he starts the shir, when he gives the shir on this, I heard him, he says, there's an Ashkenazi piyut, and any ani mimas, I'm a despised poor person. But that's what the piyut that the Shliach Tzibur says on Yom Kippur. I'm a very poor individual. I have nothing to give, but Hashem, answer me, because I'm coming to you on behalf of Klal Yisrael. So he says the same thing. Look, Hashem, to answer these questions b'koach nefesh, I can't do on my own. But to answer halachic questions b'koach nefesh, I have to. I'm the rabbi of a hospital, and Jar Tzedek asks these questions. And I'm coming not because of my individual merit, but because of the tzibur that they're asking me. So let me just give an example. And he's very much not into triage. He's a very different approach. Almost like many issues, where Schefter will pit in one direction. Usher White is very classically different. Very much Zilberstein in terms of like halachic derech is just like, it's very hard to pin down. It's not very intellectual in the Ramosha sense, nor is very precedent oriented. He'll bring tens of makoros like Rav Avad Yosef either. Rav Zilberstein has one word, bottom line answers, but fun stories. Rav Usher White is much more classic, like Rav Avad. You have to be in the sources. He's not so into Svara. Rav Schefter is so into Svara, it's incredible. We'll get to him soon. So he talks about that in 200 years before, Yisrael Salanter, when there was cholera going around, they told people on fast days you should eat, because if anybody gets sick, then you should be able to eat. So somebody said, and some Rabbanim are saying that you're allowed to do this for the minor fast days, and some people even saying for Tisha B'Av. What do you think? Outside, before we see, is that an approach sort of, now let's say there's at least 10 categories. I saw Rabbi Berkovitz from Aish.com wrote up 10 halachas for Tisha B'Av about this particular question. But let's make the categories like this. There are people that have no symptoms and not tested positive, people that have symptoms but never tested, and people that are tested positive and have symptoms. Should they eat on Tisha B'Av? What do we think? Before I get to Rav Usher White's answer and Rav Schefter's answer, just to contrast, what do we think?
Depends on the age of the person.
Okay.
Because they're potentially, like if you're older and you potentially could get corona, you shouldn't fast.
You think even if they're not testing and no symptoms?
But their potential, if they would get it, they could get very sick because they're old, and the fast already would make them sicker.
Okay.
Fasting on Tisha B'Av, and then the next day, if you started getting symptoms, the fast put you in a worse state.
Okay. Any thoughts from the ladies? All right.
You know where I come from.
I know.
Perhaps it depends on your environment. If there's a lot of COVID going around in your environment, then you're more of a sakana. Like in Texas, if I was in Florida, I'm not sure that the elderly in Florida should fast, maybe.
They're getting 1,000 cases a day.
Amazing. So Hashem Yishmar. So Rav Schefter's approach, now it's not a sakana Tisha, but his approach is throughout COVID, throughout his 45 or so chuvas, 46, he very much assumes this type of assumption that we're all under pressure. We have to deal with the situation, and it's stressful, and we'll have kulas. And we're going to rely on those opinions, and we're going to push the bar a little bit when it makes sense to. So with music during 3 weeks, he says, for someone who is getting themselves out of stress, they could do that. For dishwashers on Pesach, he said that was his first tshuva. You're allowed to kasher your dishwasher for Pesach, so you don't have to clean dishes. You might be thinking, if I'm healthy and I'm at home, and I could wash my dishes in the sink, or I could use a dishwasher, what's the shaila of Corona? But Shafter has, like, this approach is, we're under pressure. So if we rely on a leniency, let's rely on a leniency. And it's coming from a lot of Yer Shemayim, but that's a general approach. Now, when it comes to fast days, it's not as easy yet. I don't think he would come and say anybody with no symptoms and never tested would not fast. Maybe some Rabbanim would, some others. I'm not saying that's not an opinion, but I don't think we're supposed to take it quite that far. But someone with symptoms, I think he would definitely say, even when never tested, even in a younger age, I think he would be able to potentially say, no fast. Every person could ask their shaylas, but I think that would be his opinion. And Usher White has a whole different approach. And I'll give another example, just because I'm ending my time. What do you say with this? Sal Levy, I want to hear what you think. Bar Mitzvah, during Corona, that got pushed off, unfortunately. So they asked for Schachter. Let's say the Bar Mitzvah boy prepared, not your case, but let's say they prepared Parsha, they were going to do Parsha, whatever, Vayikra, and they knew the Parsha. And then there's no shul. They can't get a Sefer Torah. They can't get a minyan. Now they get, finally, weeks and weeks later, comes Parsha Naso, the shuls are open. Parsha Bamidbar. Should the boy who prepared for 2 years, the Kriyat Torah and the Haftorah, what should he do? Is he allowed to do Parsha Vayikra? But this week is not Parsha Vayikra. What do you think? Sal, what do you think?
He's on
You don't have to, it's okay. If you don't have an opinion, it's fine. You could phone a friend.
I think you should get as many family members as you can to not spread the virus. And yeah.
Hashem, you have such a good family. Baruch Hashem. What would you say though? Let's say, suppose, everybody else. What happens? Unfortunately, they can't. They have 2 people in the family, small house, and no neighbors coming. Can't do it. They're stuck. They missed it, and it's sad. So what do you say now? And he thought. So Shafter wrote a tshuva on this. He didn't write actually a tshuva. It's an oral psak. He said that it's allowed to do as the maftir. You have to do the regular week parsha. But he said, clever idea. Maftir doesn't actually count as an aliyah. We do 7 aliyahs. 7 aliyahs is all you need. The maftir doesn't count. Do the bar mitzvah parsha. Take out 2 separate Torah. Do this week's parsha first. 7 aliyahs. Maftir will be bar mitzvah parsha. He says, what about Haftorah? The boy prepared the Haftorah. Could he do it? He said, yes. But that's not this week's parsha. He said, Haftorah always follows the maftir. It doesn't need to follow this week's parsha. It's a minhag, how we do Haftorah, which Haftorah we choose. You can choose the Haftorah that he likes. And for that, I'll say a nice story. Once upon a time, Shlomo Zalman was asked the following question. There was a boy who had some disability, who had learning disorder. He couldn't learn. Whatever, I'm not sure exactly what it was, but he was not going to regular school and having an easy time. And he was trying to prepare for his bar mitzvah, so his father taught him very, very little, because he hardly could do anything. But he told him to read the words from the Haftorah. Okay, he was not able to do the regular learning of the Parsha, but he wasn't going to be able to do that. He'd be too embarrassed, not possible. What he was going to do was the Haftorah. Okay. And lo and behold, the Bar Mitzvah is coming this week, and they call Rosh Zalman. The father says, I made a mistake. I looked at the calendar, and the Haftorah I taught my son for 3 years now, and it's all he's doing is the Haftorah. Is the wrong week. I picked the wrong week. Nothing to do with Corona. This was 30 years ago. Rosh Zalman said, for that, for Kavod Abriut, you can have the wrong Haftorah. The boy will get up, he'll read the Haftorah. It's the wrong one. It's okay. Anyway, so what do you say? Rav Usher White has a tshuva on this exact question. He's writing to a shul in Edison, New Jersey. The Rabbi Lubin was asking, what do you say about that? He asked Rav Usher White. Rav Usher White says, I love Rav Schechter, and I love his answer. He said, but I looked high and low, and this is like a Rav Ike type of style. He said, and he quotes about 5 different poskim on the topic. He said, I looked high and low, and Rishonim, Achronim, Gemaras. There's nobody who says you can do it like Rav Schechter. But he says, there's no one who says you can't. He says, but look, my hands are tied. I go with precedent. Rav Schechter has a svara. Maybe he's right. Maybe in 20 years from now, we're going to dig up another Yerushalmi Kudshim from the Riaz from the Italy, and the stuff in the walls in the Vatican. Like they actually did find some things, like the Rokeach, the Yerushalmi on Kudshim. But maybe we'll find it one day and we'll see that Rosh is right. But until then, I can't paskin based on a svara, based on his logic. That's classic. So I'm going to share my screen to show that. But that's classic argument between Rabbi Usher White and Rosh. Now, you have to have some shoulders to do that. Okay, the fast day, he's also into precedent. Rabbi Usher White is not interested in being lenient on the fast days. Other than you have to go with precedent. You know, if the person's sick, so that's fine. And he has a strange line, but he basically says it's every person is promoting the phrase, you know, the more makel the person, ashrei lo, ashrei chelko, called makel mechaver, is meshubach, you know, greater is the person that's able to be lenient. He said it's lesari, it's to my sadness. He's pained by the fact that it's just to some people, if there's a halachic will, whatever, then there's a halachic way. That's totally not true. And he goes very much back to precedent, and he's not into kulas that don't have sources. Rav Usher, so talking about the Bar Mitzvah was in this page. Now, okay, I'm not going to get into this, just to put it out there. He has very beautiful tshuvas with lots of sources on, this is a very weighty question, about paying people. What do you do about if you had to cancel a wedding, or you had to cancel anything? You had to cancel your trip to Israel and you lost the tickets. Do you get your money back? Do you not? For education, do you have to pay the school full price or the Zoom price? If they're giving you Zoom education, you just pay them the Zoom price. All right, so anyway, like Rosh basically comes out, it's a suffix. There's a machlok poskim about this, small and the Ramah, and our hands are tied. Maybe you should make up shara. But you didn't stuck on Rosh said you should give the yeshivas. Rav Usher White says, and he has a long tshuva, a lot of sources, you can't do that. It's not fair to start saying suffix and mammo and everybody's going to get off the hook. But then the parents that did pay already in advance don't have to pay, do have to pay, and not going to get the money back. The parents that didn't pay don't have to pay. And then he says, a funny thing could come out. He says, the principal could, this would be terribly awful, but horrible, but he can also take two ends of the stick. On the one hand, he'll charge the parents already paid, he won't give them back any money, and he'll say to the teachers, I don't need to pay you, because you didn't do the full job, and the contract said you need to pay the job. So then the principal, whoever is in charge of the school, is going to steal all the money. So that would be a shanda, that would be terrible, that would be wrong to do. He says, obviously you can't just pass it based on suffix. You have to come up with, he says you have to make a compromise 50%. Anyway, this is a Schefter. He's the only one of the poskim that I really discussed that went to college, and he actually even has a master's degree. He is a postik at the OU. The dishwasher tshuva. Last tshuva I really want to get to is this fun one. It's not translated into English. Most of his tshuvas, as you can see in that shared screen, it's actually written in English. Rav Usher White's not in English. Zilberstein not in English. Last question, I'm going to finish this in 1 minute. He says, could you order chametz on Pesach to deliver them after Pesach? And somebody asked me this actually, Lamaisa, because they were worried. They weren't leaving their house at all. A couple was not leaving their house, and they said, we don't want to eat chametz. We don't want to eat Pesach food for another week after Pesach until we can get it delivered, because by the time we order the food, until they deliver it, it takes a week. So are we allowed to order the food, chametz, and buy chametz on Pesach? Incredible tshuva. Rosh Hashanah has to be lenient on that. Incredible tshuva. But not everybody is as quick to be lenient as he is. Anyway, thank you for joining. I want to just end with this message that we're entering now into Tisha B'Av season, and I'll ask, or at least on the email, what people want to do for next week. But the Meraglim, and what caused the whole sin was they put the peh l'ayim, they put their mouth before their eyes. And when it comes to halacha, that's a very big travesty, a big trouble that could happen, is if a person puts their heart in one direction, they decide this is going to be right, and then they look with their eyes what they're looking for to make it fit into that picture. This week is Shabbat Chazon, and the Resiliency says we call it Shabbat Chazon because it's about sight. We have to fix our eyesight. What we look at should be filtered by pure intent, and based on what we see, then make a correct decision, not decide before we see things. That applies to Allah, and applies to everything in life, and applies to how you judge other people. Many lessons. That's Shabbat Chazon, the way we see. You should correct the way we see. All right, thank you so much. Any questions?
Yes. What about the
I'll finish if
fast?
anybody wants to go.
What
Yeah.
was the answer about the fast?
The fast. So the approach, this is one that I saw from Rabbi Berkovitz, is that someone who has symptoms definitely does not have to fast. The person that doesn't have any symptoms and didn't test positive, they should fast. And they should stay inside and be careful, not even to go to a minyan if that's going to be too difficult for them. The keynote certainly on Zoom. But I'm not the post-take for everybody here. I'm not answering, everybody should, ask their questions, whoever they usually ask. But I don't think Rosh Hashanah is generally very lenient with Corona questions I've tried presenting, but not on everything. It's not everything. Okay.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you very much. It was very
Thank you, Ike.
thought-provoking.